My sister leaned in and whispered she's just mad because she's alone. Then my mother laughed and said even her own son doesn't respect her. But what they didn't know was that my son heard every word, and in front of everyone, he took the mic and shattered every lie they'd ever told about me. I never thought one moment could flip the power in a room. I was standing by the drink table, awkwardly stirring a plastic cup of lukewarm lemonade, pretending I didn't hear what I just heard. My fingers gripped the cup so hard I thought it might crack. I wasn't surprised by what they said. I'd been their favorite target for years. But this time something inside me broke a little differently. Let me introduce you to my family, or what people call a family. There's Jessa, my older sister by 2 years. She's got that sharp magazine-polished look, the kind that wears a smile that never reaches the eyes. Married to some investment guy named Brad. Lives in a picture-perfect house with granite countertops and throws parties with themes and color palettes. And then there's my mom, Colleen, the matriarch of icy smiles and subtle jabs. She could cut you with a compliment and smile while doing it. She never hit us growing up, but God, her silence when you disappointed her, that silence could swallow you whole. And then there's me, Ayla, the quiet one, the single mom, the one who chose a hard life according to mom, the one who could have done so much better if she just tried a little harder. That day was supposed to be a celebration. My niece Jessa's daughter had just graduated high school, and they were hosting a big backyard party with catered sliders, matching balloons, and too many folding chairs. I came with my son Micah. He's 17, quiet but kind, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He's got this soft presence that fools people into underestimating him. Big mistake. Micah and I had made a cake together that morning, chocolate with raspberry filling. Nothing fancy, but it was from us, from me. I showed up holding it like it might earn me a seat at the table. The first thing Jessa said when I walked in, "Oh, that's cute. We already have dessert, but I guess we'll put it on the side table." She said it with that sugary tone that made it clear. Your effort isn't needed here. I smiled. What else could I do? My mom gave me a once-over, nodded, and went back to talking with one of her church friends about real estate. Micah looked up at me. I gave him the "it's fine" face. He didn't believe it. He never does. About an hour later, the family was scattered around the backyard. I was getting a refill when I heard the voices, soft but unmistakable. They were standing near the patio door, thinking I was out of earshot. "She's just mad because she's alone," Jessa said, chuckling, then Mom's voice. "Even her own son doesn't respect her. He barely talks about her, poor thing. I mean, what's there to say?" I stood there, heartbeat thudding in my ears. It wasn't just what they said. It was how easily it came, how normal it was for them to tear me down like I was a punchline. They always made me feel like a shadow, something present but forgettable, like no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be enough for them, not married enough, not successful enough, not woman enough. I almost dropped the cup. My hands were sweating, but I stayed still. I didn't walk over. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just swallowed it down like I'd learned to do 100 times before. They always talked about me like I was an empty seat at the table, even when I was right there. What I didn't realize, what they didn't realize, was that Micah had heard it too. He'd gone inside to grab something from the kitchen and passed right by them. He didn't say a word, just kept walking, but something must have shifted in him because 15 minutes later I saw him walk up to the DJ. At first I thought he was just making a request, maybe asking for a song, but then he picked up the mic and that's when everything changed. I never used to hate family gatherings. When I was younger, I actually looked forward to them. Holidays, birthdays, cookouts, they felt warm, safe, familiar, but somewhere along the way that feeling changed. And it wasn't because the food stopped being good or the people stopped showing up. It changed because I started seeing it for what it really was, a stage, and I was the punchline. This party, my niece Riley's high school graduation, was no different. From the moment I stepped onto Jess's manicured lawn, I could feel it. The polite tension in the air, the half-hearted hugs, the 2 perfect decorations that screamed, "Look how well we're doing." I walked in carrying the cake Micah and I made together. He was beside me holding the card he picked out for Riley, even though he barely knew her. That's just the kind of kid he is. He does the right thing even when no one notices, especially when no one notices. Inside the house smelled like catering trays and perfume. Jessa saw me walk in and barely looked up from her Instagram story. Her voice was syrupy as always. "Oh, you made a cake that sweet? We already have dessert, but I'll find a spot for it." She didn't mean sweet like thoughtful. She meant sweet like you tried, that passive-aggressive high-pitched tone she mastered by age 12. I forced a smile, handed her the cake, and moved aside before she could say anything else. My mother, Colleen, was by the sliding doors deep in conversation about someone's recent engagement. She didn't greet me with a hug, just a nod and a quick, tight-lipped smile. That's how it's always been. Jessa the favorite. Jessa the golden girl. The one who did everything right. Married young, hosted brunches, had kids on schedule. And then there's me, Ayla, the single mom. The one who got pregnant at 24, got divorced at 31, and never remarried. The one who didn't reach her potential, according to Mom. I've learned to live with their coldness, but it still stings, every time. Mike is stuck close to me like he always does at these things. He knows the drill. Polite smiles, short conversations, stay out of the way. He's 17 and already more emotionally intelligent than most adults I know. Maybe because he's had to grow up watching me patch myself back together more times than I care to count. I've always tried to protect him from the worst of it. But the truth is he's seen more than I realize. He's seen me come home from work late, exhausted with blisters on my feet and barely enough energy to eat dinner. He's seen me cry in the car when no one hired me after interviews. He's heard the way my mother talks to me when she thinks he's not listening. Still, I've never badmouthed my family in front of him. I didn't want to poison his heart the way they've poisoned mine. But that day, that party, something shifted. The backyard was buzzing with chatter, laughter, fake smiles, and picture-taking. Jessa had rented one of those congrats grad photo backdrops and was pulling people in for family photos like she was shooting a Hallmark commercial. "Micah, go take a photo with Grandma," Jessa called out. He looked at me. I gave a small nod and he reluctantly walked over. I watched him force a smile as Colleen stood stiffly next to him, not even a real arm around the shoulder moment, just a photo for appearances. That's all this family ever cared about, appearances. I tried to keep myself busy clearing empty cups, checking my phone, pretending not to feel invisible, but I couldn't help noticing the small things, how Jessa's friends looked through me, how no one asked Micah about his music or college plans, how I was always the one standing just outside the circle. Still, I stayed because that's what I've always done for Micah, for peace, for some pathetic hope that maybe this time they'd see me. Maybe this time they'd just say, "We're proud of you." They never did. And maybe I would have stayed invisible that day too if it weren't for what I overheard near the patio. But that moment was still a few minutes away. For now, I just stood in that perfect backyard, holding a half-eaten slider, wondering what I was even doing there. Micah was off near the back fence playing with his phone. I remember looking at him and thinking, at least I've done one thing right in this life. And as it turns out, that one thing was about to change everything. The thing about emotional wounds is they never heal all the way when you keep walking into the same room where they were made. I'd been at the party for about 2 hours when it happened. Everything looked so normal on the surface. Cousins laughing over beer, someone's baby crying near the pool fence, music playing low in the background. But in families like mine, the damage isn't loud, it's quiet. It wears a smile and smells like wine spritzers. I had just stepped inside to grab napkins. Jessa was out and barked the request at me like I was a caterer. The napkins were on the kitchen counter, so I walked past the hallway and paused for just a second when I heard my name. That's all it took. "Isla is so bitter," Jessa said with a low, performative sigh. "She's just mad because she's alone. She chose that life. No one told her to push everyone away." I froze behind the wall. I know. I could have walked away, but I didn't. Something held me there. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was old habits. Then came my mother's voice, cool, flat, dismissive, like it always is when she talks about me. "Even her own son doesn't respect her," she said with a dry laugh. Micah never brings her up. You'd think she didn't even exist the way he talks. She's got no one but him, and even he doesn't seem proud of her." Laughter followed, not loud, just soft, ugly chuckles that cut cleaner than any insult ever could. I stood in that hallway like I was 8 years old again. Back when I overheard her telling someone, "Aila's always been sensitive," as if that explained why I was never enough. They didn't know I was there. They didn't care if I was. And suddenly, it wasn't just about what they said in that moment. It was everything they'd ever said. Every time they treated me like a burden. Every time they made me feel like I was lucky just to be tolerated. But this was new. This time they dragged Micah into it, and that hit different. Because if there's one thing I've clung to through every struggle, it's the relationship I have with my son. I may not have their polished lives or matching holiday pajamas or shiny marriages, but I had him, and they dared to question that. I felt my chest tighten, not with sadness, with rage, the kind that simmers just under the skin, steady and hot. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm in and shout, "I heard you!" I wish I could say I did, but I didn't. Instead, I turned around, walked back into the living room, and sat down at a folding chair like nothing happened. I stared straight ahead, blinking hard. My fingers trembled in my lap, my stomach twisted in knots. Micah saw me the second I sat down. He was standing near the speaker setup with a couple of his younger cousins, his brow furrowed. He gave me that look, his "Are you okay?" look. I smiled and nodded. It was shaky, but I tried. He didn't buy it. He walked over and leaned down. "You good?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine." I lied, just tired. He didn't push, just nodded and stepped back, but he didn't walk away. He stood there watching me for a minute longer, then glanced toward the kitchen where Jessa and my mother had gone. I could see the wheels turning in his head. I didn't know it yet, but Micah had heard them too. He had been passing through the hall just out of view. He hadn't planned to eavesdrop. He didn't need to. They weren't whispering. They never do. When people think they're better than you, they don't bother hiding the way they talk about you. That's what broke him. For all his quiet nature, for all the times he'd held back, swallowed his feelings to keep the peace, this time was different. This time he decided to do something about it. 15 minutes later, I saw him approach the DJ booth. He said something to the guy who looked surprised but nodded. Then Micah walked over to the mic, adjusted it slightly, and cleared his throat. And I realized he wasn't asking for a song. He was about to speak in front of everyone, and I had no idea what was coming. Micah stood at the front of the backyard, mic in hand. The music had stopped. Conversations faded like someone turned down the volume on the entire world. Heads turned. My sister looked up from her wine. My mother paused mid-sentence. Even I didn't move at first. He cleared his throat. "Hey, sorry, can I just say something real quick?" He was nervous. I could hear it in his voice cracking just slightly, eyes flicking around at the dozens of unfamiliar faces. Most of them were adults who'd known him since he was in diapers. None of them really knew him now. Jessa rolled her eyes and chuckled like it was all so adorable. "Micah," she called, "if this is about that graduation card we forgot to read, we can—" He cut her off gently but firmly. "It's not about that." That was the first moment I felt the shift. Something about the way he said it. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be, but it silenced the yard. He glanced at me, just a flicker of eye contact. I was frozen in place, a paper plate still in my lap, heart pounding. I just want to say something about my mom. And right there, I felt every molecule in the air change. He took a breath and held the mic a little closer. "Some of you know my mom as the quiet one, the one who shows up late because she had to work a double, the one who brings homemade food even when no one asked her to. You smile at her, tell her thanks, and then forget she was even here by the time you get to dessert." I swallowed hard. My hands were cold. Micah's voice steadied, but I see her differently. I see the woman who gave up everything so I could chase what I love. I see the woman who stayed up helping me record songs even when she had to be up at 5 a.m. The woman who once pawned her wedding ring so I could go on a school trip, I was too scared to ask my dad to help pay for. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. He wasn't performing. He wasn't making a speech. He was telling the truth. She's not loud, she's not flashy, she's not perfect, but she's never stopped showing up, even when all of you made her feel like she didn't belong here. Now people were really listening. I saw my aunt glance over at my mom. My mom just stood there, eyes locked on Micah, face unreadable. You think I don't talk about my mom? I write about her in every single song I've ever made. I talk about her every time someone asks me where I get my strength. I just don't say it in rooms where people won't hear it. The silence was deep now. No one shifted. No one whispered. Just a backyard full of people finally seeing something they'd refused to acknowledge. Then he said, I wrote this song for her, and I want you to hear why she's my hero. And with that, he nodded to the DJ who hit play. A soft instrumental track began, just piano and guitar, gentle and slow. Micah closed his eyes and started to sing. His voice wasn't polished. It wasn't theatrical. It was raw and real. The lyrics told the story of a woman who built her life from broken pieces, who smiled through exhaustion, who made a tiny apartment feel like a fortress. A woman who never asked to be admired, only remembered. A woman who was the quiet hero in a world too busy applauding the loud ones. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He wasn't just singing. He was protecting me right there in front of the very people who made me feel invisible. He made sure I was seen. When he finished the last line, he didn't say anything else. He just set the mic down on the table and walked straight over to me. No applause, just silence. He sat beside me, put his arm around my shoulder, and whispered, I heard what they said, but you don't have to fight them. I'll do it for you. That's when I realized he wasn't just my son. He was my voice when I had none left. Micah's song ended with a long, aching note that seemed to hang in the air like the truth no one had been brave enough to say until now. And then silence, not the awkward kind, not the kind where people shift in their chairs or nervously laugh or start clapping because they don't know what else to do. This silence was sacred. It was the kind of stillness that only comes when something real happens, when walls crack and people realize they've been watching a different movie than the one you've been living all along. My son sat next to me still and calm. His arm rested around my shoulder like it had always belonged there, like he knew I might break if he let go. I stared at the microphone where he'd stood just seconds ago. I still couldn't believe it. Not that he wrote the song, not that part. I've known for a long time that Micah has a soul that runs deeper than most adults. What I couldn't believe was that he chose me in that moment in front of all of them to honor. And make no mistake, he honored me. He didn't just defend me, he lifted me up. He saw everything I had tried to hide, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, the silent wounds, and he turned it into a tribute. I finally looked up and what I saw stopped me cold. My mother, Colleen. For the first time in years, her face was unreadable. Not disapproving, not smug, not amused. She looked small, like someone who'd just been caught peeking behind a curtain and finding something holy on the other side. She wasn't crying, but her mouth was tight. Her eyes were glassy. I locked eyes with her. We held it for a second, me and the woman who had never once told me I was enough. The woman whose approval I had chased for most of my life. And in that second, I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't need it anymore. I looked away. I scanned the yard. People weren't talking. Some had tears in their eyes. One of my uncles was gently wiping his glasses. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years mouthed the word wow. And then I saw Jessa. She had her arms crossed. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. For once she didn't have a comeback. She wasn't smiling. She was just still watching me, watching Micah, watching her narrative dissolve. The woman she'd mocked minutes ago had just been revealed as something more than a shadow. I wasn't the pathetic single mom who chose struggle. I was the reason her nephew could write a song that made a backyard full of people forget how to breathe. And for Jessa, that was worse than any confrontation. She didn't speak, not to me, not to Micah. She turned, picked up her wine, and walked back toward the kitchen. I didn't chase her. Micah leaned into me and whispered they needed to hear it, Mom. I nodded, finally able to breathe again. Yeah, I said they did. A few people came up after quietly, respectfully. My Aunt Sandy, who had always sided with Jessa in every family debate, looked like she had just swallowed a lump of guilt. That was something else she said softly. You raised a good man, Ayla. Others followed a few hugs. Some apologies disguised as compliments. I didn't know. You've done so much. I guess we don't always see what's right in front of us. It was surreal, like stepping into a different version of my life. But the person whose words I had waited my whole life to hear didn't say a word. My mother stayed across the yard, unmoving. At one point, I thought she might walk toward me. She didn't, and that was okay, because something had shifted in me too. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel desperate to be loved by people who never made space for who I really was. I felt full because the only person whose respect I truly needed had just stood up, taken a mic, and told the world I was his hero, and that was more than enough. We left the party just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across Jess's perfect lawn. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Micah carried the cake dish we brought, even though no one touched it, and I carried something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I remember the way the grass felt under my sandals, the weight of the silence between me and the people I used to bend over backward to impress. But that day, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the extra chair at someone else's table. I felt like I had finally stood at the center of my own life, and I hadn't even been the one to speak. Micah didn't say much as we walked to the car. He opened the passenger door for me like he always does, then tossed the cake tray in the back seat and buckled up. I turned to him as I started the car and said, "You didn't have to do that." He looked over at me, eyes calm and steady. Yeah, I did. There was no bravado in his voice, no smugness, just the quiet conviction of someone who had drawn a line in the sand and dared people to cross it. He didn't just defend me. He corrected the record. He took the version of me that they had twisted, diminished, and dismissed and rebuilt it in front of them word by word, note by note. And the thing that still takes my breath away, he never once asked for permission. He just did it. The next day my phone buzzed with texts. A few cousins and uncle, even Jess's husband Brad, who I'd barely spoken to in years. He wrote Micah's performance was powerful. I think it made some people take a hard look at themselves. You've clearly done an incredible job. But you know who didn't text Jessa or my mother, and I'm not going to lie. There was a flicker of that old craving, that ache for acknowledgement, that voice whispering, maybe now they'll see you. But it faded fast because something had changed inside me. I used to need their validation like air. I twisted myself into shapes to fit into their idea of who I should be. I stayed quiet when they crossed lines, smiled when they were cruel, and convinced myself that maybe if I tried hard enough, they'd meet me halfway. They never did. But Micah did, without being asked, without being pushed, without needing a reason other than love. That's the part I come back to the most, not the silence that followed his song, or the look on my mother's face, or the absence of applause. What I remember most is Micah's voice, and not just the sound of it, but what it carried: truth, loyalty, pride. I used to think raising him alone was a weakness. I used to think people looked at me and saw failure, and maybe some of them did. But that song that moment proved something else. You can raise a whole human on love. You can raise a man without a picture-perfect family, without money for vacations or fancy clothes or annual Christmas cards. You can raise a man with one exhausted, determined mother and 1,000 unspoken prayers. That's what I did. That's what they saw finally. Not a woman who failed to build the perfect life, a woman who built a man. I've stopped showing up to family events since then, not out of bitterness, but because I don't feel the need to prove anything anymore. If they want to see me, they know where I live. If they want to know the real story, they can ask the boy who stood with a microphone and told it better than I ever could. Sometimes people ask me how I managed to raise a son like Micah on my own. And the truth is, I didn't do it in spite of being alone. I did it because I was alone. No distractions, no noise. Just the two of us figuring it out, failing, and trying again. I gave him everything I had, even when it wasn't much, and he gave it back to me in one song. That night, he gave me more than pride. He gave me my voice back. He reminded me that being overlooked doesn't mean you're unworthy, and being underestimated doesn't mean you're weak. It just means they weren't looking close enough, but he was. And that made all the difference. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone in your life who's been overlooked, unseen, or underestimated, I want you to do one thing. Don't let their story stay in the dark. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment, and tell me who's your hero. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, there are more stories like this coming, real ones that matter, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths, and we're here to make sure they get heard.